Hi, my friends. I'm so glad that you could join me again today for another Bible story. Last Sunday was Easter Sunday, and we had the joyous celebration of Jesus having risen from the dead. And we heard the story of Mary Magdalene, how she went to the tomb and found the stone rolled away, and Jesus was alive. And Jesus told her to go out and tell the disciples and anyone that she met that Jesus was alive. And Mary did that. She immediately ran out to tell the disciples that she had seen Jesus. And you know what? They didn't believe her. To be fair, I'm not sure that I would have believed her. It's just a pretty amazing story that someone who was dead had risen and was alive again. It's pretty unbelievable. But Mary was their good friend. What reason did she really have to make up a story like that? Anyway, the disciples didn't believe Mary. And actually, they were even a bit afraid. They were afraid that the religious leaders would think they had something to do with it. Maybe they stole Jesus' body, or they were trying to make trouble somehow. Maybe the leaders would think that the disciples were getting up to no good and would arrest them too. So that evening, the evening after Mary saw Jesus alive, a bunch of the disciples gathered together in one house, and they locked the doors because they were afraid. And while they were all huddled together in that house with the doors locked, Jesus came and stood among them. And the Gospel of John says that Jesus said to them, "Peace be with you." You know, I always imagine that what happened was Jesus came into their room and he kind of came up behind them, behind their huddle, and he leaned in close and he whispered, "Peace be with you." And everyone jumped back in shock. I think maybe Jesus might have done something like that, but we don't know for sure. We know that John tells us Jesus came into the room and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And the disciples were shocked. And Jesus held up his hands so they could see the scars. And he showed them his side, where the scars were from him hanging on the cross. And they knew that he was alive. And Jesus said to them, "Just as God sent me to be with you and to show you God's love, so I am going to send you out into the world to show God's love." And then he blessed them and he breathed out God's Spirit on them, the Holy Spirit. That's how John, the writer of the Gospel of John, remembers the coming of the Holy Spirit. Other people remember it different ways, like with the coming of the tongues of fire. But John remembers it this way, that Jesus stood among them and breathed the Holy Spirit on them, and then he was gone. Later that evening, Thomas, one of the disciples, came home. He'd been away, we don't know where, but he came home and he arrived to all the disciples completely in a commotion. They were all talking over each other, trying to explain what had happened. They said, "We saw him. We saw Jesus. He's alive. He spoke to us. We saw the scars." And Thomas looked at them and said, "I won't believe it till I see it with my own eyes, until I feel the scars with my own hands." Well, it was a week later when all the disciples were gathered again in the house, the doors locked. Jesus came among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he walked up to Thomas and said, "Hey, you know, there are people who haven't even seen me and they believe that I've risen. And then there are people who have seen the scars and they believe, but it sounds like you need a little bit of extra help." So he came up to Thomas and he took Thomas's hand in his and he placed his hand on the scars. And then he took his hand and he placed it on the scars on his side. And Thomas's eyes grew wide. And he said, "Jesus, my Lord, you are alive." Now the Gospel of John tells us that Jesus appeared more times and that he did more amazing things, but that they're not all written down. And I believe that. If I had seen Jesus risen from the dead, I don't know how I would have written it down. I don't think that I would have had the right words to explain what had happened to me. Next Sunday, I'm going to tell another story about some people who met up with Jesus after he had risen. For today, I want to leave you with a blessing, just as Jesus blessed his disciples. If you're with somebody else, you might want to take your palm and put it on their arm or on their shoulder, or you could put your palm over your heart. May God bless you and keep you. May God's face shine on you and be gracious to you. And may the love of God flow over and all around you and give you peace. And we'll see you tomorrow.